Great to be here and great to be part of this launch today. It's an inspiring moment for me personally, and it's just wonderful to be part of a great team like this. A number of years ago, I began to wonder, ask myself the question, what perpetuates war? What is it that drives this global war system and makes it so difficult for anyone to imagine how war could ever be abolished? And I began to research the arms industry, and much to my shock, and maybe some of the things I will say to you today are shocking, I've actually begun to understand how deep-seated this whole process is. So I'm going to be talking to you about the military-industrial complex, about the arms trade, and about the insidious nature of the arms trade. If you like, that's about the monstrous anger of the guns that Wilfred Owen referred to in his poem in the First World War, shortly before he was killed by one of these guns. So I'm going to have to read a good bit of this because there's a number of figures and things that I will inevitably forget if I don't. So just to start off, I think you're all probably familiar with the phrase, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It gets thrown around quite a lot. But recently I became aware that the phrase came from the CIA, of all people, and should we be surprised when we think about it, that was the origin of the phrase? I think it fits into this conversation quite well. So I'm going to be arguing here that when it comes to the arms trade and the military-industrial complex, it's such a major avenue for profit and power that in preserving and even extending the domination of the United States, NATO, hegemony in the world, the hammer defines politics, and the world looks like a set of nails to those who reap the benefits of this terrible, shocking industry. So the innocents we're talking about here are, as we've referenced already, increasingly the expendable, and of course I don't feel these people are expendable, but people who have come to be seen as expendable, people in normalized wars that have now become normalized, and where the earth itself is also one of these expendable victims of war. Through the greed and inhumanity of war profiteers, and the militarized mindset, which has become a feature of this, violence for profit is a threat to the future of humanity and to the very planet that we're living on. That is the reality. But when we use the word innocent, I'm going to throw a question out to you in this short speech. Can we call ourselves innocent when our governments are very complicit in this whole process? So that's, again, a call to action for us. It has something to do with us, not just the ones who make the weapons and who make all the money. So the military-industrial complex, is the process that drives all this. It's a deadly, a corrupt system of manufacture, of militaries, of states and alliances organizing for war, going on as we speak. So while one is going on, the organizing is going on for the next one. This is what's been going on all the time. It counts its profits in billions. It counts its cost in human lives. The former US President Eisenhower famously said in 1961, and the US is the world's largest arms producer, bearing this in mind, he warned us, this is Eisenhower, to guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, of the military-industrial complex. That's Eisenhower, former chief of staff and president of the United States. However, this hasn't happened. We haven't guarded against the influence of this military-industrial complex. And today it may be even more accurate to characterize this as the military, industrial, academic, bureaucratic complex, and maybe we could add media for good measure, because I think they're very much intrinsic in this whole process. This complex, military-industrial, whatever we want to spin it, it's lawless, it's deadly, and it's deeply corrupt, hugely profitable, and it has a revolving door where the people, the individuals, the organizations that drive it, they move in and out of different sectors, such as the militaries, our civil service, arms manufacture, and our politics. This is going on all the time. Its profits come at the expense of human lives, these innocents and the expendable people I've referred to in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Yemen, in Sudan, in the Congo, and so on. The list is very long. Total global military expenditure reached 2.43 trillion. Now, I can't even encompass what that means. 2.43 trillion in 2023. And that's the steepest rise. That was a rise of 6.8% from 2022. And that's the steepest increase that we've had since 2009. The 10 largest spenders on military in 2023 were led by the United States, we have China, and we have Russia, and they all increased their military expenditure significantly in that period. The giant corporations that dominate the trade are Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems, Boeing, Northrop, Grumman, Raytheon, and so on. And this whole process is growing more international and transnational all the time. You have parts of weapons made here and put together there. So all countries all over the world, including Ireland, is involved in this trade. So we're not looking at those people that make weapons. This is happening here. Parts of weapons are made here, and we are implicit in this trade. The European Peace Facility and the European Defence Fund are the funding mechanisms that facilitate the development of this state of art, and it's called defence technology. That's one of the words that we hear used. So European arms manufacture and export has significantly increased, and especially since Ukraine and then with Gaza, huge increases. Germany has become a much bigger player in the arms trade. And this is a process that goes along with what I would describe as the NATOization of the European Union, increased militarization of Europe that's been going on. And it's about not just conventional weapons, but obviously conventional weapons are a huge part of it. It's also about homeland and security products, surveillance systems, AI developments, which is where it's going now, militarized borders, and especially, and we have to emphasize this, nuclear weapons. Because nuclear weapons are very much still with us and on the increase in terms of manufacture. Though many of the world's, most of the, in fact, of the world's countries, more than 120 countries have signed the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, still the nuclear powers have been ramping up, and the 5 members of the Security Council, bear this in mind, the 5 powers that can veto anything that happens in the United Nations are the ones that run the nuclear system, but they're also the largest arms manufacturers of any countries, the 5 of the Security Council. So should we be surprised? Again, we have this nuclear system, and we have to kind of be aware that we are now considered to be closer to the use of nuclear weapons than we have been at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. In fact, the doomsday clock is ticking, and it's nearer than it's ever been to the hour. So the arms trade is driven by this kind of insanity. And make no mistake, a third world war with nuclear weapons involved would be the last world war. And of course, that's not something that we should be thinking is inevitable, but it is close. So the myth of feasible strategic use of nuclear weapons, which we hear about now, is one that could bring us to the end game of life on this planet. So there are a number of myths around the arms trade and the military-industrial complex. They're sustained by these things that are repeated so often that they're rarely challenged. Chief among these myths is the idea that weapons make us more secure. We hear this all the time. The more weapons we have, the more safe we are. I would argue that it's actually the opposite. The more weapons we have, the more we should be really worried. But we're constantly told we need more because that's what makes us secure. This narrative around militarized security, it's driven by a small elite who make reap all the benefits. They're making fortunes, they're making absolute millions from arms sales. And economies that are driven by militarism, which very much impacts on ecological security as well as everything else. So the political establishment of most of the world defines national security and the national interest as the priority. That's what we're told is important. That means it's okay to be secret about it. We can't be told what's been done for our benefit because it's in national defense is secret. So again, we don't know what's going on. So these national interests, they're very short term in their outlook, and also they completely deny the other risks that exist outside of the, what are defined as the threats. So, for example, the impending or the insecurity related to climate breakdown is not considered a priority in terms of national interest and security. Militarism is a huge contributor to the global climate crisis. And the Pentagon can actually be defined as the biggest institutional contributor to carbon emissions because of the sheer volume, especially the amount of oil that the US military consumes. So again, this is the hidden side of it, the bit we don't hear. There's even the crazy suggestion that these environmental costs, which are mostly hidden, by the way, because they don't actually include them in the carbon costs. They got exempted. But there's even now a notion that is driven by the US military that we could have such a thing as green wars. I mean, how farcical is that? That we could make our wars greener and our weapons greener, which is completely ridiculous given that we know war causes intentional environmental damage. It's not accidental, it's intentional. So that's what's going on there. And that notion of greener wars is just ridiculous. Preparation for war is also impacts on the environment. So we don't even need to have wars. We have preparation, we have war games, etc., and these cause huge amounts of carbon, etc. So we're witnessing now this huge impact on the environment with weapons testing and war exercise, poisoned water, etc., etc. So let's be very clear when we talk about the military-industrial complex, the profit and greed that's going into it, let's be very clear, it makes us less safe and it significantly contributes to the climate crisis and the threat of nuclear annihilation. So let's be clear about that. It doesn't make us safer. So a couple of anecdotal bits before I kind of get to the end here. 40% of corruption in business globally, of all business, I mean that's a serious amount. 40% is considered to happen within the arms trade. And that comes from Andrew Feinstein, who runs Shadow World, one of the leading research bodies on the arms trade. 40% of the corruption driven by the arms trade. The unit costs of military hardware are beyond belief. You might have heard of F-35 aircraft. F-35 aircraft, because Ukraine has been demanding and looking for these aircraft. They're one of the most, I suppose, advanced attack aircraft, and they're used in Gaza at the moment. One single aircraft costs between 80 and 100 million US dollars for one. Okay, I think Ukraine have been promised 10. Just think about that. The sheer cost of a unit of any of these things. The US spends more on so-called defense than the 5 next big countries that follow them. So yeah, the justification of these levels of military spending requires the maintenance of a constant climate of fear. Because if we don't have fear, how do we justify the wars? So the fear is kept going, the wars are kept going, and the weapons keep rolling out. Ireland wants to be a player in this trade, already is to a larger extent than maybe we understand, although a lot of this is actually hidden under something that's called dual use, which I would argue is a euphemism which is equal to a lie. We export weapons by exporting key parts of weapons that the final product couldn't be used without. So we're involved in this trade too. The expansion of NATO drives weapons sales. So Sweden and Finland, the most recent countries that joined NATO, that process was driven by arms companies in those countries who seek to benefit and are already reaping those benefits in their own financial benefits, should I point out. Yet there is more to militarism than the arms trade. However, militarism, I think, I would say the arms trade is the key, perhaps, symptom, if you like. But there's also an increasing convergence between military and civilian spheres of life. This is happening all the time. You see sports events now where the military are rolled in, and what are the British Army doing starting a football match in Twickenham? What's that about? But this goes unnoticed. Militarism, civil activities, sporting activities are rolled into one. This convergence is going on. Military elites are also afforded radical monopolies through subsidies to provide military services. And also, security is being increasingly defined as whatever can be met by military means. So it's the wrong way around. So we should look at security from the other side. So whatever can be met by military means, that's security, and that's what is being paid for here. Diplomacy might be seen as an alternative to militarism. In fact, we all assume, surely that's a better way to do things. However, diplomacy is increasingly becoming militarized itself. So, for example, we are aware of the fact that in many countries, the US embassies and other embassies, European embassies too, work as brokers for arms trade, and they're involved in the selling of weapons in the countries where they are embassies. So an interesting figure for me is that the US employs more people to maintain a single aircraft carrier. Now, an aircraft carrier is like a floating base. They employ more people to maintain one aircraft carrier than all the diplomats they have in the world. Okay, that's pretty incredible. And they have 12 aircraft carriers. So that'll give you an idea where the priority lies. It doesn't lie with diplomacy. It's about militarized activities. Okay, so just to finish, it is absolutely vital that we promote alternatives and break the cycle of profitable militarism for the sake of our democracies, for our accountability, justice, equality, and for a safer and more peaceful world. This book, which I've drawn on a little bit here, The Monstrous Anger of the Guns, takes its title from that Wilfred Owen poem. And the poem, the line that is stated here, Owen said, "What passing bells for those who die like cattle, only the monstrous anger of the guns." We should all be about opposing this monstrous anger and this vile trade in weapons. Thanks all very much.